think you'd like to live in the Victorian era? The elegant dresses, the gaslit streets, the Gothic charm. Well, think again. We romanticise it endlessly. But in reality, it was a harsh and dangerous time to live, especially if you happened to be a child. Then, let's spend one day as a young Londoner in the 19th century and see how dark that era really was. Welcome back to Female Tales. I'm Yulia, and together on this channel, we explore the stories of remarkable women from history. If history speaks to you, like the video, join our community, and let's head straight into the depths of the past. Alright, first things first. If you want to be a child in the Victorian era, you'll need to actually be born. So, go ahead, cross your fingers and hope for the best. Ideally, that you'll be born into a wealthy family. Although, let's be honest, when it came to childbirth, being rich didn't help all that much. Giving birth was basically a game of Russian roulette for everyone, regardless of class. What we now consider one of the most natural parts of life was, back then, something incredibly dangerous and deeply taboo. Let's start with pregnancy itself. In Victorian society, it was seen as something a bit shameful, something that should be hidden. After all, if you were visibly pregnant, it was a clear sign that you'd recently been doing that thing that makes babies. And sex, of course, was seen as a low animalistic pleasure, something polite society didn't talk about. It's a little absurd when you consider that Queen Victoria herself had 9 children, and by all accounts, was a passionate woman who adored her husband Albert and wasn't shy about writing her romantic adventures in her diary. But double standards were an inseparable part of that era. If you were rich, you disappeared from society the moment your belly began to show, hiding away in the privacy of your luxurious home. If you were poor, well, too bad. You kept working, right up until the baby arrived, doing your best to hide the pregnancy, because getting fired was a very real risk. But the most dangerous part, of course, was giving birth. Medical technology was, let's just say, primitive at best. Wealthy women typically gave birth at home, with male doctors attending. Men who had increasingly pushed traditional midwives out of the picture. Forceps had already been invented by then, but many doctors distrusted them and preferred to just pull the baby out with their hands. Ironically, this fear of medical tools is what helped make Victoria Queen in the first place. She was never supposed to inherit the throne. It was meant for Princess Charlotte of Wales, but Charlotte tragically died in childbirth, along with her son, after nearly 3 days of agony and 0 proper medical assistance. She was denied food, given bloodletting, and left to suffer. Victoria moved up in the line of succession because of that single medical disaster. If you were a poor woman, the worst thing that could happen was ending up in a public hospital to give birth. Germ theory wasn't understood, and basic hygiene, basically non-existent. Doctors didn't wash their hands, even after dissecting corpses or treating patients with infectious diseases, and then they'd go straight into the delivery room. Unsurprisingly, the maternal death rate from postpartum infections and complications was horrifyingly high, as much as 60% in some areas. A Hungarian doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis figured this out in the 1840s and dramatically reduced deaths in his clinic simply by insisting on hand washing. The result? His peers declared him insane and threw him in an asylum, where he later died. Why? Because if he was right, that meant doctors had been killing their own patients for decades, and that was a truth no one wanted to accept. But hey, if you made it out of all that alive, congratulations! Happy birthday, little Victorian baby. Now all you have to do is survive infancy. So here you are, a newborn baby in Victorian England. But don't get too excited just yet. Roughly 2/3 of children born in the 18th and 19th centuries died before the age of 5, and 3 out of 4 of those poor little souls didn't even make it to their 2nd birthday. Now, look around you. If all you can see is a cramped, filthy room, packed with people of all ages, chances are you've been born into one of London's poorest slums. Which means yeah, you're in for a lifetime of misery. Your mother, who'll likely return to work the very next day after giving birth, might name you something sweet like despair, murder, feather, or lettuce. Yes, these were actual baby names. And she'll probably leave you in the care of an older sibling, elderly relative. Sadly, many of these babies were not the result of love, but of short-lived encounters and desperation. Still, that's arguably a better fate than being abandoned altogether or handed over to a baby farm. See, if a young woman hoped to make something of herself, say work as a servant in a respectable household, she needed a clean reputation, and an illegitimate child was a permanent stain. She had two options. One, surrender the child to a foundling hospital, which involved standing before a committee and proving that your baby was a one-time mistake and that you were deep down a respectable woman. The process was humiliating and judgmental, so many women opted for option 2, baby farms. Think of these as long-term daycare, or more accurately, commercial orphanages. Only they were often closer to hell on earth. Why? Because the women running these farms were in it for the money. They'd take in far more babies than they could care for, and often they didn't care at all. In Victorian London, one infamous woman named Amelia Dyer made headlines when it was discovered that she had been responsible, either through neglect or outright murder, for the deaths of over 400 infants. And yet, maybe you got lucky. Maybe you're lying in a bassinet lined with lace and silk. Maybe you're the cherished baby of a wealthy household. Still, don't relax just yet, because two very Victorian dangers are lurking: feeding bottles and the colour green. Yes, green. Specifically, Scheele's green, a wildly popular shade used in wallpaper, book covers, toys and baby clothes. It was absolutely everywhere, and made with arsenic, slowly poisoning the air you breathe with every little gasp. How lovely. And about those bottles, well, breastfeeding was considered a bit shameful among upper-class women. For example, when Queen Victoria's daughter, Princess Alice, decided to breastfeed her own children, the Queen was so horrified that she named one of her cows Alice and made sure her daughter heard about it. So, our aristocratic babies were usually handed over to a wet nurse, but middle-class families often used the infamous killer bottles. These oddly shaped glass bottles had long, narrow tubes that were almost impossible to clean properly. Milk would collect in the tubing, turn sour, and breed all kinds of deadly bacteria. At the time, no one knew about germs, so babies regularly came down with dysentery or typhoid fever. And, let's just say, treatment options were limited. But hey, if you've survived this far, congrats! You've now unlocked the next level, childhood. Well, my dear friend, it's 5 a.m, time to get up and get ready, but not for preschool or a nice warm breakfast. Nope, you've got a 12-hour workday ahead of you. You can cry all you want and tell everyone you're just a child. But remember, you wanted to live in Victorian England. And here, no one really cares about your age. At the height of industrialisation, with cities booming and factories multiplying, the demand for labour was massive. Victorian society was, quite literally, ruled by children. During Queen Victoria's long reign, 1 in 3 of her subjects was under the age of 15. And children were cheap. Very cheap. They made up 50% of the entire labour force. So, by the age of 5 or 6, most kids were already working. Prince Albert once said that a working man's child was simply part of his productive power. In other words, little hands equals extra income. A child could earn as much as 5 shillings a day. For comparison, an adult might earn around 15, and girls, of course, were paid less than boys. So let's pick your job for the day, shall we? Choose your own deadly adventure. Option 1, chimney sweep. Because children were small and flexible, they were perfect for climbing up and down narrow chimney shafts. That is, until they got stuck and suffocated. It was also a short career path. By the age of 10 or 12, you were likely too big to fit. So, early retirement if you lived that long. Option 2, coal mine worker. Steam powered everything in the Victorian era. Trains, ships, factories, and steam required heat. Heat required coal. So guess what? A huge percentage of child labourers ended up in coal mines. Kids were perfect for crawling through tight, unstable tunnels, but just like the adults, they faced constant danger from gas explosions, collapsing tunnels, and accidents in the pitch-black dark. Option 3, factory hand. Your tiny fingers are ideal for changing thread spools and handling delicate machinery parts. The downside? There were zero safety rules, not for grown-ups and definitely not for children. On textile floors, kids had to pull loose cotton from under fast-moving machines, which meant fingers and hair often got caught in the gears. Scalpings were not uncommon. Yes, really. Still not found your dream job? Well, there's always newspaper boy, shoe shiner, match seller, flower girl, or if things get desperate, begging or petty theft. But I do hope you're a good child and won't turn to crime. And now, for a fun little fact. The Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals was founded in Britain in 1824 and supported by Queen Victoria herself. But child welfare laws? Those came 67 years later, in 1891. Thankfully, toward the end of the 19th century, people started to realise that maybe childhood should be about more than just surviving. A reform movement began to push for education instead of exploitation. And by the late 1800s, British children between the ages of 5 and 10 were legally required to attend school during the week. So, if you were one of the lucky few whose parents chose school over the factory floor, congrats. But hold on, what were Victorian schools actually like? If you thought school might finally be your safe haven, think again. Forget colourful classrooms, group projects and enthusiastic teachers trying to engage young minds. Victorian schools were not that. Instead, picture a cold, bare room. Desks, a chalkboard, and one exhausted teacher. That's it. No posters, no books to take home, no fun. Education back then wasn't about creativity or critical thinking. It was about repetition. Children copied everything the teacher wrote on the board and memorized it by heart, day after day, hour after hour. Joyless? Absolutely. And if you were in a poor area, which, let's face it, most people were, your classroom was probably packed with 70 to 80 kids at a time. Imagine trying to concentrate in that chaos. Were you a difficult student or just slow to memorize your letters? Well, instead of a gentle chat with your teacher or a call home, you'd be met with punishment. The Victorian favourite. Canes, sticks, rulers across the knuckles, or the infamous dunce cap, a pointy hat of shame worn while standing in the corner for everyone to laugh at. And what exactly were you being beaten into learning? Well, it wasn't science, music, or arts. It was all about the famous 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. Now, you might think this harsh environment was only for the very poor, but nope. If you were part of the rising middle class, you were likely sent to a private boarding school. And conditions there weren't much better. In fact, do you know the famous Bronte sisters? They had 2 older sisters who also attended a girls' boarding school and died there. The school was cold, underfed, and ran on a strict, joyless routine. Girls were frequently ill, and the harsh conditions often led to diseases like tuberculosis. So, if you're sitting in your uncomfortable uniform, freezing in a crowded room, endlessly reciting your times tables, maybe that coal mine doesn't sound so bad after all. Okay, time for a break. Fancy a little snack? Well, unless you were born into a rich family, put down that avocado toast and latte, because Victorian kids from the slums weren't exactly dining in style. In fact, many homes in London's poorest areas didn't even have kitchens, ovens, or cooking utensils. Some families didn't own plates or spoons, let alone pots and pans. A typical poor household spent about 12 shillings a week on food, and the majority of that budget went toward one thing: bread. meat, a rare luxury, maybe once a week, and it had to be stretched as far as possible. Once in a while, kids might get lucky and have a seasonal fruit or vegetable, but that was the exception, not the rule. And now, allow me to introduce you to the true legend of the Victorian working class diet, jellied eels. Yeah, slippery, squishy, and served cold. But hey, there were lots of eels in the Thames, so they were cheap, filling, and didn't require fancy preparation. Bon appetit? Unsurprisingly, this kind of diet wasn't great for growing children. Many slum kids were malnourished, anemic, suffered from rickets, and were often very short for their age. Not exactly the ingredients for a happy, healthy childhood. But wait, what if you were one of the lucky few, born into a wealthy Victorian family? Surely that meant a happy, carefree childhood, right? Well, not exactly. If you were rich, your daily life was likely managed by a nanny who was responsible for raising you, teaching you what was proper and what was absolutely not. Your parents, you might have seen them once a day during a scheduled visit, if you were lucky. As Winston Churchill once said, he could count the times he had been hugged by his mother. And yes, the famous Victorian motto for child rearing definitely applied here. Children should be seen, but not heard. As you grew older, your education began, but only depending on your gender. Boys were considered far more important to educate. They were taught academic subjects and practical skills to prepare for leadership, politics, or running estates. Once they hit around 10, they were usually sent off to elite boarding schools like Eton, Oxford, or Winchester College, where they learned how to become gentlemen. Girls? Well, they stayed home. Upper-class girls weren't sent to schools. Instead, they were taught how to sew, embroider, paint, and play musical instruments, all the skills that would supposedly help them in their true mission in life: marriage. After all, in Victorian society, being a good wife was the most respectable path for a woman. So, the goal was to raise a girl who could cook a decent meal, keep up a lovely conversation at tea, and be talented enough to impress guests or, more importantly, make her husband proud. It wasn't until later in the century, especially moving into the 20th century, that educational reforms and new women's colleges began to open doors for girls. But in the Victorian era, most of those doors were firmly closed. Well, our little imaginary time machine is ready to take us back to the 21st century. Are you still dreaming of staying in the Victorian era? Or are you running full speed toward the comforts of modern civilization? It's honestly incredible to think that less than 200 years separate us from that time. And yet, the way we see childhood, human rights, hygiene, thankfully, and education has changed so dramatically. So, how was your one-day adventure as a Victorian child? Would you survive? Would you thrive? Would you prefer a hot shower and a pair of sweatpants? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to suggest where or when our time-travelling story should take us next. Until then, see you in the next video.